Everyone say hi to Kylie.
Hi, Kylie. You missed an awesome story.
Yeah, we'll fill you in later.
You had a baby.
Yeah. I think you had a better week than I did.
No, this is just video.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm just recording.
But I'm really dark, sorry.
Oh, got it.
Oh, I turned my screen down, so it wasn't distracting.
All right. So, bye, Miranda.
Bye. Story's over.
All right. So, I think we're going to do a good job getting through the day. So, obviously, I've got to condense things a little bit, but part of me is okay with that. This is a little bit more my teaching style. There is so much information on adolescent family therapy that you can kind of dive into. I've spent 10 years studying all this kind of stuff just on my own. It's why I'm getting you into articles and kind of looking for your own stuff to kind of get you moving in that direction so that you're learning how to be that consumer of research and other sources that are going to help to train you. I could give you 10 times more than we're doing here, and you get to your first day of therapy and you go, woo, it's all gone. Because you're so nervous about being there. And that's why we're alongside you to help, remind you of a couple things. Remember when we talked about this, back in that semester? And you're like, no, I don't remember that at all. And then you just have to kind of repeat things. So we're going to get some things out there. We're going to keep learning. So we talked last time about a little bit about child development, a little bit about some of the different parenting paradigms that you may consider and look at. The thing that we didn't get to at the end of week 2 is kind of just thinking about systemic behavior, okay? So that's what oftentimes children and adolescents are brought to us as therapists, and it's, can you fix the behavior that I'm not happy with my child? We're wrestling with this. There's lots of other things that happen too, but that a high percentage can be that. So I really like to make sure that we're looking at behavior through a systemic lens. We are systemic therapists. Let's not lose sight of the system, because it could be easy for us to get drawn in. A parent has concerns, and you want to help the parent out, so you kind of get tied into their behavior modification models. Let's keep our systemic lens as we do this. So the first thing when we think about systemic and behavior is all aspects of clients' lives are interconnected. Okay, Kylie, I want you to look at my hand. And everybody else, I want you to tell me what you see in front of you. Just describe different aspects. What do you see?
5 fingers.
Okay. Skin.
Joints, knuckles.
Joints, knuckles.
I was going to say kind of bony.
Hey.
Hey, I got bony hands and fingers too.
All right.
Creases.
Creases.
See, she called me ring.
Next is my arm.
Skin color.
Skin color, yep.
Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Michigan.
Yep.
Oh,
A little bit of both.
Could be both.
Nails.
Nails.
Hair.
Who's gonna? So who's gonna catch what we're all typically miss? The space between my fingers and how they relate to one another. We often look at something and we see the concrete, the very specific, the easy things to describe. But systemic is we're also looking at, what's close together, what has more space between it. So okay, we can do the Spock thing. And that's more convincing. That's not Spock. And now I'm using references. Half of you have no idea.
Yeah.
I know.
I lost that, didn't I?
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. So this is just an understanding that all aspects of clients' lives are interconnected. So you can have all the family members, and so you have each family member but a lot of what we're looking at is also between them. So a family comes into your office. One of the first things you say to them is,
Hi.
"Hi, please sit wherever you would like." Why do we do that?
To see where the relationships are coalesced or where there's distance purposefully.
Yeah. Do they sit close to each other? Do they sit separate from each other? Who sits where? So that's all the spacing type of things. So those are the systemic things that we want to look at. Okay? Number 2 here, young clients need to be understood in the context of their unique situations. Okay? We've already talked a little bit about mirror neurons, right? I talked about, firstborns versus secondborns, and secondborns tend to be a little bit better athletes on average because they spend a couple years watching an older sibling, kicking a soccer ball around in kindergarten or something like that. So we have these mirror neurons for everything, okay? If I sit here and start doing this, does anybody notice a little extra saliva in your mouth? You might not be thinking about it, but mirror neurons start to pick up things from each other. Okay, so often, if you mimic drinking, you might notice, or the food goes by you and all of a sudden your mouth starts to water even though it's not your meal. But those kind of things happen. So we have these things called mirror neurons. So children and adolescents, are they individuals sitting in their home? No, they're little sponges. And so everything that's happening around them, just a lot like all of us, even to this day, we see things and we start to draw it in. Now, when we're older, we can start to differentiate between, so I just told you a story. I had a really bad Tuesday. Did that change your Tuesday? No, you had your Tuesday. We know the separateness of our Tuesdays last week, okay? But children sometimes experience the environment, the emotions that are around them, and do they have an abstract understanding of my emotions versus your emotions? So I get big and loud and angry. Sorry for people who let's soothe ourselves. So that comes up. I feel that inside. But that's the person who was upset. That's not me. But all of a sudden, what's this inside of me? And I start to confuse my emotions with what's going on around and start to create interpretations. So that's how, and then I respond behaviorally in relation to that. So systemic behavior. Often behavior is playing out different aspects of the environment around children and adolescents. All right? Questions we can be asking or thinking about. What happened to them? So when behavior is coming out, not what's wrong with them, what happened? What, if they grew up in a nice environment that really nurtured and met all of their needs, in most circumstances, behaviors would probably flow a little bit different. Behaviors are often an expression of trying to get our needs met, and certain needs weren't met or met in bad ways, and so we're trying to work that out. So I think about what happened to them. I want to learn about how did they respond to what happened to them, and then how did others respond back to them. So what are the dynamics within their household? They usually don't have a lot of control over their own lives in the younger years. Things are kind of shaped and dictated for them. So what happened in their environment? How did they respond to what was going on in their environment? And how did their environment then respond back to how they responded? And you feel how this is a lot different than just having a student in your office and just doing individual therapy. Tell me about your life. Let's fix the problems in your life. It's keeping that systemic lens, Brockenbrenner, realizing all these different layers of things, influence and impact. And this came from the text, and it's just a good reminder. All counseling is multicultural. even if I'm sitting down with somebody who pretty much mirrors all of my social location. You know, we came from the same town, we have, you know, a lot of the same people around us, a lot of the same experiences, we identify in a lot of ways the same. There are never two people that are exactly the same. We have our different environments that we've been in. We have different ways that we engage in, and ways, experiences that we've had and how things have responded to us. And so that can be tricky sometimes. I've sat down with people and made mistakes in therapy because, like, well, you know, they're so much like me. Like, well, I know what they're experiencing, and I'll just bring my thought process and resolution and kind of work with them that way. And then I bumped into something like, oh, but you are different from me in other ways that aren't as obvious. And so to remember that all therapy that we do, every single client you have, your first job is to spend as much time as you can getting to know them as a unique person. Get to know them and their story. What's happened to them? How did they respond? How did others respond back? Thoughts or questions? So thinking also about the environments that they're in. So you're working with a student coming from their own family system or environments that they're in. What behaviors are acceptable? You're going to get a whole bunch of different family systems that walk through your door that are going to have different rules, different expectations. So what behaviors are acceptable and not acceptable in their system? How are they allowed to express? Are they allowed to express emotions in their system? Or is that, is that a no-no? Who gets to express emotions? The adults and the parents? I just had a conversation with actually one of my supervisees about that today, where we talked about how the parent in the situation, we're talking about a defiant student who's running into some juvie issues, all right? But how does the parent tend to address it? By getting very big and very upset and not very regulated, okay? And that's going to fire fight or flight, okay? Even with I hope when I got big at you over here, I think you know me well enough. Did it feel scary and like I was really going to come do something bad to you?
Yeah. No, it was intense for a second.
It was for a second, but you calculated that. But, it does send us into a little bit of fight or flight when something gets big, when something comes at us, whether we like it or not. And so, yeah, how can emotions be expressed? How is a person even allowed to manage them? What's okay for coping and what's not? Are they allowed to go to their room and be by themselves? You know how many students I've had whose parents have taken the doors off their hinges to their bedrooms? They have no escape, no ability to go and just down-regulate themselves because their parents are going to have access to them every moment wherever they go because of what's going on.
Parents get so mad that they punch holes in there and knock down their doors.
Yeah. Okay. So, how do people around respond? How severe should it get before help is sought? When I do my seminars, that hands pop up all the time. Like, so when should I start to be concerned? I'm here because I am concerned about something for my student. Like, when should I take them to get help? And everybody's got different, and that's a hard one for me to answer because there's not a, well, if they hit this exact point, this is when you do it. What's acceptable in your system? I want to know your family system. What's the history there? How does your family system do this? Or how do the people around in your community respond to that? We're going to have a conversation about what that looks like. I can have some recommendations, but people often want very concrete answers to that. And that's, when it's systemic, it's a little bit more complex than that. And then what kind of help and interventions are allowed? Is therapy even okay? How many students do I have brought to me who are like, I do not want to be here? Or that say, parent, could I go see somebody? Sure, I'll call. Never call. I've had multiple students who are like, I asked my parents over and over and over and over again, and they just dismissed and denied. Like, it wasn't priority. It wasn't something that they thought was really necessary. It wasn't something they valued, even though the student wanted it.
You know, when you mentioned too, like some students will be like, "Oh, I don't want it." Do you still talk to like? Is there ever a time where you kind of push? Like, those are sometimes the kids who really need it.
Well, I'll always,
Scenarios where you talk to a parent and say, "Okay, they don't want to come, but they really should be."
That's a great question. So I actually take a little bit different take on that one. So I get a number of students who, maybe they come to me when they're 17 or 19, 25. They're like, yeah, I was drugged to a therapist when I was 12 or 13. Absolutely hated it. Swore I would never go back. And if somebody's saying that in my office, how many people did never go back? So I actually have a conversation with the parents of, we can't make anybody else do work if they don't want to and if they're not ready. Just bringing them here doesn't mean anything's going to happen. Now, I can try to work with them and make it the best I can. So if somebody is coming, it's kind of like a court. I hate to say it this way. It's kind of like, but it is. It's kind of like a court ordered. But I say to my court ordered is, I know you don't want to be here. How can we make this suck the least possible? What can we try? How do we make this space okay? So I'll do that with my teens as well. But I'll tell the parents, I know you want them here. Part of it is, I wish I had this when I was their age. So of course I just want to get it. But if you force it on them, they may never come back when they're actually ready to do it because they had a bad experience. And so my first commitment with any child or teen is I want to make this the best experience possible so that therapy becomes something that they see as a positive resource for them. That whenever they need it, they will come back to it. So I've said to parents before, and some of them get frustrated, like, I was trying to get them here. Like, yeah, but you might be pushing too hard and you might derail it when they actually can utilize it.
Yeah, I had a specific case recently at my job. I work in eye care, and we had a contact lens rep come in, and I've seen him for years. And he will talk about his family, like trips and stuff. Well, they have 2 foster kids, and he was telling me about the boy in high school and how many struggles he's had. He's been in the office, and so I just kind of started to ask a few questions, especially being in school now. You're just like, now my brain probably goes to a different. And I was like, and I knew he's black, so I asked him, like, well, have you ever had that conversation with him about things that you see as privilege and he doesn't? He said, isn't he in a predominantly white school? So we started having these conversations, and then he's like, and I brought up therapy. I'm like, well, maybe he would benefit. Maybe you should look at that too. And then he's just like, well, I've asked, and he just doesn't have any interest. And he's like, if he just knew what we were trying to do for him, his sister can see what we've done, And I'm like, oh, this poor kid. I'm just like, there's so many things like going off in my head where it's like. But again, like, yeah, it's not my place to overstep. I'm not a therapist. So I was just like, how do you, like, when you have those conversations and people are just, there's that person who means well in one way, but he's so ignorant in another way. And it's like, and this kid is dealing with that and probably trying to sort it out in his 15-year-old brain. And, so it's just, but again, like, I didn't want to overstep. And I was like, what do you do? Like, when you're talking to somebody and that's kind of their mindset, like, well, I brought it up, I'd get him help, but he just doesn't want to. And it's like, okay, if he's 15, he doesn't really want anything from you because you've made sure to tell him that's all you've done is give him everything. And so that's kind of what made me ask about it.
So thank you for that. And another thing as I'm listening to that and thinking about my own experience, sometimes when I talk about some of these things, because you have to kind of toggle between them, because I do get the ones that come in and you're like, I'm not real thrilled with how certain parents are approaching it. But let's also remember that a lot of times the parents that were like, they're not approaching this great. What happened to them? What was okay for them? So don't lose sight of the parents. Keep that compassion. So when I share one side, I'm going to try to always balance it out. we're going to talk about frustrating parents here, but we need to be careful about demonizing them, seeing them as the enemy, thinking negatively about them. Even though we want to, we see things with the students that we're going to work with, and we want to help and protect them. The parents are, if we are systems therapists, even if the parent isn't our identified client, in my mind, what do I need to understand about them, and how can I help them? I tell people in the intakes, I will never be for the parent against the child or the child against the parent. I'm here to help, if they're coming in together, to build the bridges of connection as best I can where it's safe and appropriate. We might have other work to do before that can ever happen, and in some cases it never can happen. But, so I just caught myself, like sometimes when we talk about these things, it can almost seem like we're parent bashing, and we need to be very careful with that. So I just wanted to kind of give a counterbalance to that. All right. Other things to consider. Let's go back to our DSM class. Recognize social prejudices that over-pathologize certain populations. Okay? So there are ways that we get caught in ways of thinking that could see certain behaviors as more problematic. That might be coming from our social location and how we've been socialized to look and see things. Certainly, and this is good and this is a problem. And as we've seen through the DSM, some certain diagnoses, certain populations can be prejudiced against and over-pathologized in certain ways. So be aware of that systemically. Problem behaviors are often based on culture and expectations. You can have the exact same behavior walk into your office, and one parent sees it as the worst thing in the world, and the other doesn't see it as an issue at all. So is it fully the behavior, or is it what part of what system around it is viewing it, and what expectations do they have? Little all play question here. This is where you can throw something out. How might therapists sometimes perpetuate some of the challenges we see and maybe accidentally move away or intentionally move away from some of the systemic lens that we want to be looking through?
Stereotyping typical behavior that we just chalk up to, well, teenagers will be teenagers when we don't look closely enough at the real things that are going on.
Yeah. So we developed our own stereotypes about teenagers and our views of them and what behaviors are.
Dismissing feelings for teenage hormones, or like a lot of times we were talking about like stereotyping and pushing into these, like dismissing in general, dismissive feelings.
Yeah.
Which is, I feel like, ultimately taking these sides too.
There's multiple children or in a household, like assuming like it has to do with like the role of like the oldest child or the middle child or the youngest child, because that's what the oldest does or that's what the youngest does.
Mm-hmm. Right. So there's been research. At times in history they look at like probably a level of pseudoscience. The first one. There are some generalities. There are some things that are on Instagram that I look at my wife like, we got 4 kids, and it's like, yep, that is kind of our firstborn, yep, those are kind of our middle 2, and yep, that is, so certain stereotypes can kind of fit.
Well, and it kind of makes sense when you think about like the first child, they all kind of have this trope, because that's every parent's first child. You've never been a parent before, so it kind of makes sense that there's an oldest child trope.
Right.
And that there's like the baby trope, because parents usually know when they're done having kids. But yeah, to an extent, I'm like pseudoscience. But then also as somebody who's in the middle of 6 kids, that shit pops up on my Instagram, and I'm like, no, I definitely have big middle kid vibes.
But what happens when somebody sits in your office and flips it upside down?
Right. And it's like, okay, are you using that as like your out? And is it by reason or by excuse? Is kind of my question about some of these narratives that like we may be perpetuating. Is like it might be a reason. Is it an excuse? So that's what I'm meaning by is it by reason or is it by excuse?
Any other thoughts? Thank you. And just think about the last questions. This is our last slide for this. We'll take a little break. I want to make sure that we keep moving. I don't want to say anything too long since we have a lot to get through today. But think about this as you become a therapist. You're going to be asked to conceptualize case conceptualization. What's the problem? Because I have to develop a treatment plan. I have to have a diagnosis. I have to have a treatment plan. How are some of these things influencing your perception of the problem? Or your interview style, how you even interview people, the types of questions you ask, how you ask those questions. You know, I even asked you, how do you want me to tell the story today? You want the drama version? You know, there's ways you can tell stories. There's ways that you can interview that can bias, you know, certain ways or perpetuate certain things. Or your choice of therapy with a client. Or, you know, so how are all of these influenced by things? So just some things to kind of sit on and think about as you go into therapy, as we try to keep that systemic lens and realize this is messy, this is complicated, there's a lot of considerations that we need to hold in our mind as we sit down. It is what makes people scared of family work. Because there's a lot, you know, it's one thing to get to know, you know, really look at one person and get to know them and culture and influences and, you know, social locations and all these different pieces, you know, and then put 4 different people in the room at one time and you're trying to juggle that and understand, you know, genograms and how things have flowed through family systems. It gets tricky. So, all right, let's take 10 minutes. Hi, Kylie. We'll take 10 minutes and we'll start off with last week's material.
It's still on though, we're good.